So if I ask you what is your ideal partner for like you single guys, if you were to give me a list of all of the qualities that your ideal girlfriend was to have, I can guess some of them as basically universal. You want her to be kind, you want her to be feminine, you want her to be beautiful, you want her to be sexually generous. These are basically going to apply to 99 out of 100 men. Less common, but still like applying to a lot of guys out there is a lack of sexual experience and even a preference for a woman who is a virgin. You know, it's not something that we necessarily talk about. I think it can feel like a little bit not PC, like that preference might be a bit slut shamey or sexist or old fashioned or religious or whatever it might be. So it's not something that a lot of men are comfortable admitting, you know, or perhaps they just think it's unrealistic. But if you were saying, hey, you can actually design your woman, your partner from scratch, give her all the qualities, all the experiences, all the attributes that you want, a lot of guys would say, I want her to be a virgin. Now, why is that? That's what we're going to discuss in this video, both the psychology of why a man would like that and also the implications of what kind of a relationship is going to follow on from dating a woman who is a virgin. So let's just start off this discussion by asking Matt, does the idea of being with a virgin appeal to you? Would you like a girlfriend who'd never been with any other guys until you?
I think it is the logical endpoint of desiring a woman who has, at very least, minimal sexual experience. It's just the logical endpoint. So my kind of framing of this is the less, the better, because of all sorts of reasons of risk of infidelity, of risk of STDs, of all the pair bonding psychology that you've talked about in this channel. And so it seems kind of an inescapable conclusion that the closer to being a virgin, the better. And I'm willing to stand behind that simply because it makes the most sense. Although I part of me feels like it's missing something, and maybe it's just the realism component.
All right, well, let me just inhabit my radical feminist persona and then challenge you.
Oh, I love this one.
Okay, so Matt, that's really sexist for you to want a virgin. You know, that's just because you are an insecure man and you don't want to be compared to other men and you're only man enough, you know, to be with a woman who has no basis for comparison. Like, you should be ashamed of yourself. What's your response to that?
Well, I'm shameless, so that wouldn't work. But first of all, it actually makes perfect biological evolutionary sense to want to ensure as much paternity certainty as possible. So that's where the instinct comes from. Whether or not I stand behind the instinct as a completely unchangeable reality or not is up for debate, especially in this conversation. If a woman said that to me, my first thought would be, oh, I see. You don't actually care about evolutionary psychology. You're just interested in political feminism. We can have a conversation about that, but I already know I'm not working with someone who's going to be reasonable to how I look at this world anyway. So their opinion of me essentially becomes irrelevant because they have yet to look down the rabbit hole that I'm most interested in. So yeah, I wouldn't take it personally at all. And I would happily stand behind this instinct.
Fascinating. I'm so with you, but I love how clean and neat your categories are in your mind. Like, oh, awesome. Like, great. Let's have a great political discussion. I'm not going to take on board anything you said because I completely agree with you. I don't know, actually, just as a slight aside, how to engage with people who don't grant the premise of evolutionary psychology or biology being a thing. I'm thinking, I don't know what to point in reference to. And if somebody wants to debate the very existence of whether or not evolution is real, like if they're a creationist or they're just such a social constructivist that they don't think that counts, so we're basically all blank slates, I wouldn't even be the person to argue against them. I'm like, okay, you need to go speak to Steven Pinker or like somebody else, like someone who's because I'm like, from where I am, I'm like, okay, let's all just agree this is obviously science. And it's like, oh, so what do we do with it? If they dispute the science itself, I'm a little bit deer in the headlights. I don't know. I don't know what foundation to even start my arguments on if we can't even agree on that kind of basis.
A lot of people do very openly just shit on evolutionary psychology as a non-science, and these are some very smart people that do that, and it's a weird kind of left-wing fad. It's partly because evolutionary psychology is often the only scientific subject that a lot of douchey bros will know a little bit about, because it tends to jive with a lot of what they think and feel, and they go there first. That being said, it is remarkable to me how smart people will consistently dodge EvoPsych, is the shortened version of it, as if it's unfounded and non-scientific and just so stories. And it's like, oh, you that means you spent about 5 minutes looking into it from a BuzzFeed article. Like, how about you open up a textbook, read a couple chapters, see if it feels a little more sciencey to you. Maybe we can talk then.
Mm-hmm. Yes, no, I would agree. All right, to be a bit more disciplined, I'm going to get back onto the virgin thing, because I will also
get back on the virgin. Yeah,
I will also admit, obviously, it's not relevant to either of us anymore, but I can make sense. Like, okay, in my heart of hearts, obviously, the less the better, and 0 would make the most sense. But let's not talk about it in terms of I don't want to be compared to other men. Basing off those instincts, it obviously makes sense that the pair bonding is going to be so much stronger if you're the only guy that she's been with. You've been 100% of her experience. She went through that first incredible journey with you. That's something that's going to bond you together for life. And the data is absolutely bulletproof, and the confirmation is that there is such a strong link between the larger number of partners that you've had and an increased likeliness of divorce. The data size is massive. Millions of people that they've been able to study. No, sorry, not millions. From countries with populations of millions, but the data set for the surveys, thousands, tens of thousands. And so it's not just enough to simply say, oh, this is a weird preference that just has to do with how men feel about themselves. It's like, actually, if I'm interested in having a healthy relationship, if I'm interested in providing a stable environment for the future of my children, the less sexual experience that she has had, the better. And the reason why I feel like we're slightly insulated from accusations of sexism in saying this is not just because we can refer to the obvious evolutionary psychology instincts of paternity certainty, is because for me, I'm also going to make that point with regards to the man. I don't think that it exists to the exact same degree as that does to a woman, in that a man can have had more sexual partners and it inhibits his ability to pair bond to a lesser degree than women. But still, essentially, the fewer that a man has had, the more he's going to be dedicated to that one woman who he's lost his virginity to, which is why you can see, even though I don't agree with the religious foundations of like a Christian kind of couple, it tends to be that they can stay together if they both got together as virgins. It's like, wow, there's something incredibly special, as opposed to he slept with 20 women, had a real party boy phase, and then married a virginal girl. He's going to have already gone through his whole brain circuitry of like, I've got a lot of pathways leading me away from this woman. It's hard to resist that sometimes.
Yeah, this is a possibly a comforting note for our very large feminist audience, I'm sure, who is concerned that maybe we're applying this rule asymmetrically. I agree. While I think per unit of, per body unit, I think there's less damage to the man's pair bonding ability than to the woman's, just because of the way that our psychophysiology works with regard to sexuality. But still, for the man, very likely the less the better, all the way to Chad virgins.
Yes, 100%. Now, let's give a little bit of due to the other perspective on this, which is that I think people can over-exaggerate the importance psychologically of sexual experience to the point where people can become paranoid about a woman's capacity to pair bond if she's been with other men, essentially as though, like, oh, she's already belonged to somebody else. And I think that you do feel like tones of slightly like a patriarchal kind of sexist, like woman's property kind of vibe kind of coming into there. So it's important to try and distinguish between what is a healthy desire to, like, okay, no, I want a healthy relationship with a lot of pair bonding, and what is actually a more fragile kind of insecure sort of like, no, I want the woman to be completely mine. And the reason why I think I'm trying to make this caveat is because I think that sense of ownership of another person can inhibit your capacity to actually have that healthy relationship. Because while the pair bonding and the intensity of that bond can be strong, obviously that's not just something where it's like the more the better, you can't possibly get enough of it. When that bonding gets too intense, it becomes codependence. In order for there to be a healthy relationship, there does need to be a certain amount of respect for the independence, the sovereignty, and the autonomy of the other person. And I think that's especially true when it comes to sexuality. Now, that doesn't necessarily extend to like a free love, polyamorous, like free-for-all. But for example, if your partner says, that guy we're watching in this movie right now, I find him really handsome. on the whole, I think as a man, you have to be okay with that. You can't just be like, no, you only exist as a perfect expression of my sexuality. You only have eyes for me. I married you as a virgin specifically to guard against this. You can never have that kind of ownership or control over another person. And while the sexual stuff should be geared towards you, largely in heart, body, and mind, and certainly in terms of actual experiences, it is important to understand that you don't own your partner. They do have a sexual personality that exists independent of you, and that occasionally, at least in fantasy, that's going to come out like in their mind. You will have a healthier relationship, and the pair bonding is actually going to be of much higher quality if you can appreciate and respect that rather than fighting against it. Have I made my point? Am I making sense, Matt?
I think your point is excellent and very valid. There's a danger to it, and it's to take your point at face value. I agree. One should get comfortable with and maybe not so much celebrate, but at least very comfortably accept that you and your partner are both sexual beings, and you were sexual before you met each other, if not in act, then at least in essence, right? And that if one of you were to go away for whatever reason, they would still have a sexual life, in some form. You know, it doesn't make sense to be that possessive. That's a little bit the realm of fairy tales, right? But there are some people who will use what you just said as an excuse to very comfortably and kind of obtusely, if I'm using the word correctly, broadcast their sexuality in front of their partner and say, you can't accept that I'm a sexual being. I've seen men do this and women do this, and essentially claim immunity from criticism because their partner must be insecure because they don't like when you overtly hit on people in front of them. And so while what you said is true, there is an ethics that needs to be in place, and that's going to differ depending on the couple. A couple of things you've said in previous podcasts we've done where you made the same example of commenting on an actress or an actor on TV and saying, oh, aren't they so attractive? And the other person doesn't seem to have an issue with that. Me and my partner don't do that. It's not like I couldn't handle it if she did, but we just don't do that. And I probably wouldn't like it very much. I don't know how much it would really bother me. I'd have to see it in person, but people are going to have different levels of how much they wear their sexuality on their sleeve. And we have landed in a place that is probably quite conservative, relatively speaking, maybe more so compared to you.
Are you self-censoring, or does it not occur to you?
I'm probably self-censoring to some degree, but I mean, I've never really been that kind of guy anyway, to just very overtly call out my sexual interest as it walks by on the street. You know, that's never really been my style anyway. And so it's not that it doesn't occur to me. It's just that I guess I've been blocking it since I was 13.
Okay. So I think that's probably the difference between the two of us. There's two things. Is that one is one of the highest values that I have in a relationship is my capacity to exist without self-censorship. That's so important to me. If I ever felt like I had to, limit what I said or thought in the presence of another person, I would lose complete interest in that person. One of the primary ways that I experience love or my capacity to be loved is in somebody's total acceptance of me. I can't stand the feeling like they view a part of me as being unacceptable. So it's really, really important. And I also seem to have a unique interest, particularly in people's faces. I don't tend to comment so much on women's bodies, like unless there's just something spectacular sort of about it. But I've always been fascinated by the human face, and I've always been fascinated by my own psychological interpretation of certain facial features. Like I'm fascinated by what a woman's face evokes inside me. Like, oh, she makes me feel like this, or it makes me think about that in terms of her character, or like even slight facial expressions. And so I have my own subjective fascination with what it is that I find beautiful. So I think it's those two combinations of things that probably leads me to feel like I comment on the women that I find attractive and things like that. But I have no problem with what you've said. Possibly you're making me realize that I might be a little bit more of a minority. And so the reason I was very, very open just then in my self-disclosure is I want everybody to understand that when it comes to my videos, I'm not always speaking objective truth. Sometimes I'm speaking from my own personal bias. And the fact that Matt has a different experience here is going to leave you guys in the audience to make up your own mind as like, oh, I'm kind of like Alex. I resonate with what he's going through. I sit more with Matt. I think it's respectful to not talk about that. Or you're something completely different. So I just wanted to be upfront with that so that everyone can make up their own mind.
Well, thank you for saying all that. That's fascinating to me that your kind of thermometer for love and acceptance in a relationship is inversely proportionate to your self-censorship. That's so interesting to me because I don't want to say I self-censor because it's such a loaded term, but there are a lot of things that I think that I will not say, and it's because I should not say them because they won't help anything, and that they're pointed in the wrong direction and they're wrong, and they suggest an emotion that I should probably just process inside. It's kind of like farting in public, like maybe it'd be fine if we all just did that all the time, but I think that having a little bit of discretion might be a good idea. This is an interesting
I would die.
Difference
I could not be in a relationship where I had to do any of that. I would be like, no, this.
Maybe I just have worse thoughts than you do. Because I think some stuff like I'll frequently stop myself and be like, I'm not making that joke. No one wants to hear that joke. And then inevitably when they pull it out of me, I was right. I shouldn't have made that joke.
All right, well, I guess you're the only person who knows that, but
Just trust me, you're better off, I'm better off. 1% of stuff stays.
I mean, look, part of this is the therapy journey, and you'll discover this because I know you've done you've had a career already in counseling and coaching, but when you open up your own private therapy practice, you're going to encounter this from men and women alike, in that part of how they're going to feel like a developing sense of trust in you is they're going to volunteer more and more vulnerable information.
Yeah.
And that's going to be how they feel cared by you when they see that you're not going to judge them and that it's a safe space for you to express anything you want. We have gotten so far off marrying a female virgin. We've got to get back on topic.
Can I very briefly touch on that? Because I fully agree in the therapeutic context. Full disclosure, let everything out. Very good idea. I absolutely agree with that. I don't think, personally, I would not put that same expectation on my partner to be as formally accepting of everything I possibly think as a paid therapist who's trained for decades to do that role. It just seems like I don't need her to do that. I'll go to my therapist for that. But if it's important and it's something that I don't want to say, but it really matters for our relationship, of course I'm going to say it. If it's just an offhand comment in my mind about, a woman walking by, I don't need to say that because I actually don't even really think that. It's a thought that emerged and I notice it and then I let it go because, I am the thoughts that I choose to exaggerate rather than every thought that happens to emerge. But this is getting into identity and that's a really tricky topic.
Yes. Oh, well, let's go back to a much simpler topic, female virginity, because I want to speak for a moment to the female audience, because I know we actually have, I can think of about 3 or 4 women who in our Patreon community who are still virgins. They've shared this with me. They're saving themselves for marriage or whatever. And I want to just make a general statement about some of the dangers, because I feel like so much of the conversation so far has been from our perspective, the male perspective. It's like, yeah, of course we kind of want, virgins for all of the reasons that we've already described. But it's not actually the advice that I would necessarily give a woman. I don't tell women to save themselves for marriage. And so, let's get into that. Let's try and reconcile why I might say, look, I understand the male desire, but I don't think for a woman. And the reason is because the pair bonding capacity and the drive from women is so strong when they sleep with their first partner. Like all the women listening, you can probably think about the guy you lost your virginity to. It's a powerful pull. Like that's really, really strong. But what I think some of the concern is that if you don't have much experience sexually or even just romantically dating lots of guys, and then you sleep with somebody, for the first time, you understand that there's going to be a massive biological incentive for you to try and make it work with him. So much of your hormones or instincts are going to be pushing, like, I'm going to make this work. But if you've not been with any other guys, then you don't really have a very good basis for comparison as to whether or not he's the right guy. And so my concern would be that if you sleep with a guy or if you wait until you get married, what if he's actually the wrong guy? And therefore, you've kind of made your bed and you lie in it for the rest of your life, all because you were trying to preserve like a sense of virginity for your eventual kind of husband. I question whether or not the value of your virginity is that much higher than you being more informed romantically as to what's best for you. And so my advice to women is have sex within the confines of a committed relationship. Don't do the one night stands, don't do casual hookups, don't do flings or anything like that. It's the same advice I give to men, but I don't think that there's anything wrong whether you're 16 or 19 or 25. If you're in a relationship, explore your sexuality, have sex with them. Yeah, when you're 28 and you meet the guy of your dreams and you want to settle down with, the fact that you've had 4 other partners before you've met him, it may inhibit your pair bonding. It might decrease it, but you will be better able to recognize the quality of that guy that you met later on in life because of the experience that you've had before. And the fact that you don't have to fess up to a bunch of really drunken one-night stands with a bunch of men you don't know the name of and you're really ashamed of, that's going to be enough, I think, for most guys. Yeah, they'd probably prefer you'd been with nobody and that you'd also reach the same conclusion. But just speaking realistically, that's the advice that I give to women. And that's kind of the final thought that I want to rest on, but I'll leave it for Matt for his final thoughts.
This is surprising, Alexander, because you have evidence that even beyond one, higher partners equals higher rate of divorce. Mm-hmm. And yet you're willing to sacrifice that data set on what sounds like a plausible, but as of yet unsubstantiated suspicion that women might accidentally fall too deeply into relationships that aren't exactly right for them. Now, like I said, it's a totally plausible hypothesis, but weighed against the actual evidence that we have, I feel like it might be a little bit the wrong direction, right? And I sympathize with the advice, but frankly, I think I would rather encourage men and women to develop the emotional capacity however they can to not need sexual experience in order to develop the eyes to see who is and is not high quality. Can we not figure that out without essentially blunting our ability to pair bond so that we don't get overwhelmed by our love hormones, right? Wouldn't that be ideally a better way to go?
I mean, I'll answer that in a moment. I'm just sort of, again, filled with gratitude that you joined me for these Patreon episodes. And I hope that the audience is with me and that there's a lot of value in Matt and I finding these points of disagreement, not to find an objective truth, but to actually reflect on the value systems that create them so that the responsibility is then passed on to you. Because if it's just me talking, there's such a power imbalance between the speaker and the audience, and that it seems like because you're listening to me, I know necessarily the truth. But the fact that we've got 2 speakers here and the fact that Matt can disagree with something that I've said, it blows that fourth wall open and then opens you guys up to be a part of this conversation so that you can find out your own journey. Because we're going to find out here, I think that Matt and I disagree. That's fine. Like that's absolutely fine. So Matt's point is a really good one. Like I totally respect where he's coming from. It makes a lot of sense. I ultimately do disagree, but I think that the real takeaway for me that I will incorporate into what I'm saying is that the ability to recognize quality in other people doesn't need to be gained through sexual experience. Such an important thing that he just said, and 100% true. In fact, it shouldn't be anywhere near your primary way of doing that. You should be developing your ability to recognize quality in people, not just in dating or relationships, but also in friendships, workplace, family, therapy, all of that stuff. And that's really wonderful advice. But the reason why I'm going to stick to my original perspective is because I don't think that couples staying together, not getting divorced, is a good enough metric to necessarily speak to the quality of a relationship, because I've seen so many dysfunctional relationships that are long-term, particularly, I'd say, religious relationships. There's not that many ultra-religious relationships that I've seen that I envy, at least in the long term. There's lots of people who are staying together because they think that it's a sin to get divorced or whatever, so that's not necessarily good enough. And I just place such massive importance on finding the right partner, because I'm so cynical about the quality of the average human. I just think that so many human beings are just so far beneath the quality that should exist in order to have a functional relationship. I'm not discriminating against women there. I'm saying men and women combined. Mostly they're failing miserably. They're so far beneath what their actual potential might be. And if you end up pair bonding to one of those people who's not got that capacity to grow, you will pay for that mistake for the rest of your life. And so I am terrified about the consequences for people who listen to me of being with the wrong partner. And you'll see that theme echo in my channel over and over and over again. So yeah, for me, the risk is worth it, because I also don't take the blunting of your capacity to pair bond by having slept with that many people all that seriously. It's true. It's real. It's a real phenomenon. But the thing is the higher the quality of the person that you are, the more deeply committed you are to like therapy or your own self-growth, you are unlocking a trillion new ways to pair bond with a person. So the more complex and individuated you are as a person, the less you need to rely on the purely sexual in order to make that pair bond with a person. And so the path that I am advocating, I would say it's perhaps the more ambitious path, whereas Matt's path is more the safe path. And I'll give him his chance to rebut to what I'm saying in a moment. But I'm really thinking like I'm shooting for you guys listening to me on Patreon for the best of the best of the best. I'm not advocating a play it safe kind of strategy. I'm trusting you guys to be listening to this channel and doing your own self-work to become as higher quality individuals as you are. And when you're really at that stage that I'm talking about, you can afford to not have that sexual capacity to pair bond at its maximum strength, and you'll still be absolutely fine in your relationship. Everything else is going to be so optimized, and you'll be able to bond in so many other ways that it's worth the risk. I don't know if that's changed Matt's perspective. It doesn't necessarily matter if it has or not, because, but it'll be interesting to finish out with his final thoughts on what I've just said.
You have just about changed my perspective. You've done a very good job. That was very well argued. This is very tricky. I'm going to have to think about this more to really know where I land on it. I think I was almost fully sold on your argument until you described mine as the play it safe strategy, which made me think that maybe I didn't exaggerate sufficiently what I really meant, because I don't think that taking on your the very demanding task of assessing quality without actually going through sexual relationships, I don't think that's playing it safe. I think that's almost unreasonable of an ambitious demand. And so maybe you could argue it's playing it safe because it's so unreasonable that's actually impossible. But I guess I have more faith in people's ability to essentially transcend what is likely to happen and do what is the most optimal. And this is, I mean, I've made mistakes in my sexual life. You know, I've partnered up with women I should not have, and boy, do I wish I could, you know, there's a part of me that wishes that they had just not happened, you know, and I wonder if there are men and women out there who would hear stories like mine and think, oh, if I just don't do what he did, I'll have an easier time pair bonding later on in life. And then they just continue the logical sequence from that down to essentially as few partners as possible. And it still, to me, just feels like that's the most logical way to go, even with the potential pitfall that you might make a bad choice. I don't think that you might make a bad choice anyway. You know, I feel like you're not scrubbed from that danger no matter what. I have to write about this. There's so much to say and my brain is going in 20 directions. So this was a lot of fun, and I love when we disagree.
Well, hopefully the comment section's going to continue the conversation now that we've finished, because I am going to be fascinated to read where people have read, and perhaps by reading what the community says on this topic, it'll further clarify your thoughts for you, Matt.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Awesome.
I appreciate all the words.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you in the next one.